Ever wonder what happens after you swallow a pill? Like, where does it go and how does it actually, do its thing?
It's like a hidden world inside us, right?
Yeah, totally. So today, we're taking a deep dive into pharmacology.
The study of how drugs interact with our bodies.
We're going to break down a section from a pharmacology textbook, no less.
But don't worry, we'll keep it fun.
Promise. We'll decode all the jargon so you understand how your meds actually work.
And not just prescription meds. We'll even cover things like caffeine and alcohol.
Yeah, it's all connected, right?
Absolutely. So where do we even begin with something as complex as pharmacology?
Well, I think a good starting point is dose.
Yes, the all-important dose. It's not just about how much you take.
There's more to it.
Oh, yeah. It also involves how often you take it and the total amount you consume each day.
Yeah.
Think of it like aspirin.
Okay, aspirin?
You can take a low dose daily to help prevent heart problems. But a higher dose of aspirin, that's what you'd take for pain relief. Same drug.
Different doses, different purposes. That makes sense. So it's not a one-size-fits-all situation.
Exactly. And that brings us to another important concept, the route of administration.
Oh, you mean like how you actually take the medication?
Exactly. Swallowing a pill, getting an injection, even absorbing something through your skin, all these different routes can impact a drug's effectiveness.
Huh. I never really thought about it like that.
It can make a big difference. Take nitroglycerin, for example.
Mm.
It's used to treat chest pain, angina.
Okay, angina.
Now, if you take nitroglycerin under your tongue, it gets absorbed really quickly.
Why under the tongue?
Well, it bypasses the liver that way. If you swallow it, the liver gets first dibs and breaks down a portion of the drug.
So it's less effective if you just swallow it.
Exactly. That's called the first pass effect.
The liver's like a gatekeeper, huh?
In a way, yeah. It decides how much of the drug gets through to the bloodstream.
Interesting. Okay, so let's say the drug makes it past the liver. What happens next? Does it just magically know where to go in the body?
Well, not magic exactly.
Yeah.
More like a complex journey. And this is where we get into pharmacokinetics and pharmacodynamics.
Oh boy, more big words.
Don't worry, they're not as scary as they sound. Pharmacokinetics is basically what the body does to the drug.
Okay, so like how it gets absorbed and moves around.
Exactly. And then pharmacodynamics is what the drug does to the body.
I see. So it's like a two-way street.
Precisely.
Hmm.
Think of pharmacokinetics like tracking a package. Absorption is like picking it up from the post office.
Distribution is it being delivered all over the body.
You got it. Then metabolism is like unpacking the package, breaking it down into smaller pieces.
And elimination, that's like throwing away the packaging.
Exactly. You're a natural.
Yeah.
Now let's move on to pharmacodynamics, what the drug actually does once it reaches its destination.
Okay, this is where things get really interesting.
Right. So at the cellular level, it's all about receptors.
Receptive?
Think of them like tiny locks on the surface of our cells.
Okay, tiny locks. I can picture that.
Drugs act like keys, fitting into specific locks.
So a drug needs the right key to unlock a specific action within the cell,
Exactly. Some drugs act like agonists, meaning they activate the receptor.
turning the lock and opening the door.
Yes. But others act like antagonists, blocking the receptor and preventing it from being activated.
Like putting a piece of tape over the keyhole.
Perfect analogy. Let's take a familiar example. Caffeine.
Ah, my favorite drug.
Caffeine is an agonist. It binds to receptors in our brains, stimulating the central nervous system.
Hence the energy boost. Okay, so the dose, the amount of drug we take, that must impact how these keys interact with those locks, right?
Absolutely. It's all about the relationship between the dose and its effect, which we can visualize through a dose-response curve.
A curve.
Yeah, it's like a graph. It helps us understand two key concepts, potency and efficacy.
Wait, remind me, what's potency again?
Potency is how much of the drug you need to produce a specific effect.
So a highly potent drug, you'd only need a small amount.
Exactly. Now, efficacy is the maximum effect a drug can produce.
So no matter how much more you take, it won't get any stronger.
You got it. Think of morphine, a powerful painkiller. At low doses, it relieves pain, but increase the dose and it starts to suppress breathing.
Wow, so finding the right dose is really important.
Absolutely. It's a balancing act, maximizing benefits while minimizing risks.
This is all making me think about how doctors figure out the optimal dose for each person. There are so many factors to consider, right?
You're absolutely right. Like a patient's weight, their age, the severity of their condition, and even what other medications they're taking. It's not as simple as just picking a number.
It's like solving a puzzle to find the perfect fit.
Exactly.
This is way more complex than I ever imagined.
Right. But understanding these basics can really empower you to ask your doctor better questions.
I feel like I'm finally starting to understand what all those tiny words on the medication information sheets mean.
That's great to hear. And believe it or not, we've only just scratched the surface of this fascinating world.
There's more.
Oh yeah. Next, we're going to dive into the world of drug development and research. We'll talk about how new drugs are discovered.
Oh, that reminds me. I read somewhere that some drug discoveries happen by pure accident.
You're right, sometimes luck plays a role, like the discovery of penicillin.
I've heard that story. It involves mold, right?
It does. But even accidental discoveries still require rigorous scientific processes to prove they're safe and effective.
So let's talk about those processes.
Sounds like a plan.
Okay, so accidental drug discoveries, like how does that even happen?
Well, it's not always completely random. Take penicillin, for example.
The antibiotic.
Yeah. Alexander Fleming, the scientist who discovered it, he noticed something interesting in his lab.
What was it?
So he was growing bacteria in these petri dishes, right? And he saw that some of the dishes had mold growing in them.
Oh.
And the weird thing was, the bacteria weren't growing near the mold.
Huh, so the mold was somehow killing the bacteria.
Exactly. That's how he discovered penicillin.
Wow, that's pretty amazing. But I guess even with a lucky break like that, you still have to prove it actually works, right?
Oh, absolutely. Drug development is a super long and complicated process.
So it's not just about finding something that might work.
Nope. You have to make sure it's safe and effective, too. And that involves tons of research and testing.
What kind of testing?
Well, it all starts with preclinical research.
Preclinical, so before they even test it on humans.
Exactly. This stage involves testing on cells and animals.
To see if it does what it's supposed to.
And if it causes any harm, they're looking at things like absorption, distribution, metabolism, and elimination.
All those pharmacokinetic things we talked about earlier.
Yep. They're trying to build a safety profile for the drug.
Making sure it doesn't have any nasty side effects.
Right. If a drug passes preclinical testing, then it can move on to clinical trials.
Clinical trial, that's where they test on humans, right?
Yep. And those are divided into 3 phases.
3 phases. Okay, break it down for me.
Sure. Phase 1 is all about safety.
So like a small group of people.
Yeah, usually healthy volunteers. They're given different doses of the drug to see what happens.
To make sure it's safe before they give it to people who are actually sick.
Exactly. They're looking for any immediate side effects and figuring out the safe dosage range.
Okay, that makes sense. Then what?
If the drug passes phase 1, it goes on to phase 2.
And that's where they test it on people who actually have the condition they're trying to treat.
Right, and it involves a larger group of patients.
So they can get a better idea of whether it really works.
Exactly. They're looking for evidence that the drug is effective, and they continue to monitor for any side effects.
Got it. So what's phase 3?
Phase 3 is the biggest and most rigorous phase.
How big are we talking?
Thousands of patients, often across multiple locations.
Wow, thousands. That's a lot of people.
It is. In phase 3, they want to confirm the drug works for a diverse group of people.
And to compare it to any existing treatments. Right.
Right. They also gather data on any long-term effects or rare side effects that might not have shown up in the earlier phases.
It sounds like the ultimate test.
It is. If a drug passes phase 3, the company can submit their data to a regulatory agency like the FDA.
The FDA, they're the ones who decide if a drug can be sold to the public, right?
Right. They review all the data from the clinical trials and make sure the drug is safe and effective.
Wow, this whole process sounds incredibly long and expensive.
It is. Developing a new drug can take over a decade and cost billions of dollars.
Billions. No wonder new medications can be so pricey.
Yeah, it's a huge investment.
But I guess when you think about all the research and testing involved, it makes sense. They're trying to save lives after all.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about how drugs get absorbed, distributed, and all the phases of development. But what about how they actually work inside our bodies, like at the cellular level?
That's where it gets even more fascinating. It's all about receptors.
Receptors. I'm intrigued. What are those?
They're like tiny gatekeepers on the surface of our cells.
Gatekeepers. That sounds important. Tell me more.
They control what goes in and out of our cells.
All right, so receptors. They're like tiny gatekeepers on the surface of our cells, controlling what goes in and out. That sounds pretty important.
They are. They're essential for communication within the body. Imagine them like a mailbox.
A mailbox. Okay, I'm listening.
Each cell has these mailboxes, these receptors, and they're designed to receive specific messages.
So only certain messages can fit in certain mailboxes?
Exactly. And these messages can be things like hormones or neurotransmitters, telling the cell what to do.
So how do drugs fit into all of this?
Well, drugs can act like sneaky imposters. They can mimic the shape of the natural messages and bind to the receptors.
So they trick the cell into thinking it's receiving a legitimate message.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's how they produce their effects. Some drugs, agonists, they activate the receptor just like the natural messenger would.
Like a fake key that still opens the lock.
Perfect analogy. But then you have antagonists. They bind to the receptor, but they don't activate it.
So they block the real message from getting through?
Exactly. It's like putting a piece of tape over the keyhole. Now, with so many different types of cells in our bodies, it makes sense that there are also many different types of receptors, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. Otherwise, every drug would affect every cell the same way.
Right. Each receptor is designed to bind to a specific type of messenger molecule. We have receptors for hormones, neurotransmitters, growth factors, all sorts of things.
So a drug targeting a serotonin receptor in the brain will have a totally different effect than one targeting an insulin receptor in the pancreas.
Exactly. That's why drug development is so complex. Scientists have to figure out which receptors to target for a specific condition.
It's like finding the right address for your message, making sure it reaches the right cell, and triggers the desired effect.
And to make it even more complex, sometimes there are even subtypes within a receptor family.
Subtypes,
Yeah,
like variations of the same mailbox.
exactly. They might be slightly different shapes, so they respond differently to different drugs. This is where targeted drug development comes in.
Okay, targeted drug development, what's that all about?
Scientists are working on designing drugs that bind very specifically to certain receptor subtypes.
So they can fine-tune the message even further, minimizing side effects.
That's the goal. It's pretty amazing what they're able to do these days.
This whole world of receptors and signaling is so intricate. It makes me realize how much we still don't know about the human body.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
We're constantly learning new things about how drugs interact with our cells. And the more we learn, the better we can design new and innovative treatments.
This deep dive has been an incredible journey. We've gone from the big picture of how drugs travel through the body down to the tiny world of receptors and cellular signaling.
It's all connected, isn't it?
Yeah, it's pretty mind-blowing when you think about it.
And it just goes to show the more we understand about how drugs work, the more empowered we are to make informed decisions about our health.
Absolutely. So to wrap things up, I just want to say a huge thank you to our expert for sharing all this incredible knowledge with us today.
My pleasure. It's been a great conversation.
And to our listeners, we hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into the fascinating world of pharmacology. Keep asking questions, stay curious, and remember, knowledge is power when it comes to your health. Until next time, keep exploring.